Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, good. I just want present mode. Um, okay, getting. Okay, so like I said, I'm the Research Integrity and Compliance Officer at my university. I'm new to the topic, so I'm kind of using the opportunity of this presentation today to also think through myself about what's needed at our university, and what the different options are in terms of governance. And as you'll see in my presentation, I am coming at this from a research integrity perspective and always thinking about how should researchers be using Gen AI in an ethical way, and what are the integrity risks for the use of Gen AI tools. So that's the very particular focus of my work. So let's talk a little bit about the current reality. Um, So ChatGPT is 2 years old now, since November. Um, we know that it's being used pervasively in publications that we know from last year. 60,000 was the minimum number of scholarly papers published in 23 that are estimated to have been used with the assistance of an LLM. We know that there are AI tools now available that go far beyond ChatGPT, and they're available for all stages of the research process. We see tools like Elicit, SciSpace, Perplexity's been around obviously for a while, Le Chat Mistral, a French tool, and Consensus, and there are many more, and particularly many tools available for um, um, speeding up the literature review process. And we know that there are AI tools available for producing all types of content, and that we have to always remember that we're not just talking about text generation, but we're talking about all different types of content that can be produced and pose many different risks for research integrity. In terms of researchers using how they're using them, from a study from last year, we can see that a lot of researchers, for example, postdocs here, are using them mostly for refining texts, for publications, for writing code, or for summarizing literature. So they seem to be, yeah, relieving them of other complex tasks, administrative tasks, and yet freeing up time, sorry, is what I mean, for other complex tasks. Um, and yeah, particularly helping with publications. Okay, so what we know about the benefits, of course, it's helping with academic writing, helping with reviewing large volumes of scientific literature, helping with writing code and speeding up data analysis. Particularly for international researchers, it's really helping to overcome language barriers and helping with translation, and in a way making research a little bit more equitable for those working in an environment where English isn't their first language. And of course, it's producing groundbreaking research. So we know, of course, about the positives of conducting research using AI. This is just one recent example where we can see how it's been used to come up with new therapies for rare diseases. However, of course, the risks go far beyond just plagiarism. While we've all been focused, or a lot of people have been focused within universities on the kind of policing of Gen AI and worrying about plagiarism in PhD dissertations or in journal articles, we know that Gen AI can also lead to more fraudulent research, to generating images, can lead to hallucinations and incorrect content within research papers. And of course, one of the really big issues is the black box problem, is the fact that we can't explain how AI reaches conclusions. So that means we can't explain our research, and that poses a risk for a core principle of research integrity, which is reliability of our research. So how do we overcome that? It poses risks for privacy and confidentiality, particularly, for example, if someone is engaging in the peer review process and decides to upload a paper into an LLM in order to conduct a review of that, this would breach confidentiality, or uploading personal data within the training model. We could be breaking GDPR legislation and doing that. It could be spreading misinformation and harmful content. There's been lots of cases of ChatGPT or other models producing racist and sexist responses, produces biased training data, and of course, it has an environmental impact that we also have to consider, as it consumes large amounts of energy. So while there's the benefits, there's also huge risks, and risks to research integrity that our researchers need to be aware of. Okay, so how do we ensure the ethical and responsible use of AI in research? And where do we start with governance? So I think the starting point, um, particularly in a European perspective, is to look to the existing governance frameworks, and there are numerous that exist, and that we should be utilizing. We should be starting with looking at the European Code of Conduct on Research Integrity, that any governance that we implement in terms of policies or guidelines needs to have at its core the core principles of research integrity. We need to look to the living guidelines on the responsible use of Gen AI, which probably Inga, that's here today, that's probably what you were involved in. And these are very useful guidelines and ones that all universities can draw on as a starting point for developing their own guidelines. And there's also frameworks from UNESCO, OECD, and of course, we need to be aware of the obligations under the EU AI Act and what that might mean for universities, and make sure that that's also incorporated into any policies or strategies we develop within our institutions. Um, Okay, so in terms of going back to the basics first, and that's what has to be at the starting point for governance, is the core principles of research and research integrity, and that's reliability, honesty, respect, and accountability. And that applies to the use of Gen AI as much as it applies to anything else in research. That doesn't change. So reliability in terms of researchers need to be able to explain how they used AI tools and their methods and be able to verify those methods. They need to be honest in terms of course, how they disclose how they use AI, and that acknowledgement is getting more extensive. It's goes beyond just saying they used it, but giving much more detail on the types of tools they used, the prompts they gave. Um, we need respect um, in terms of how it impacts the environment, how it potentially impacts privacy and confidentiality, and intellectual property rights. And of course, there needs to continue to be accountability. We know that AI can't be an author. And what that means is that, of course, researchers need to continue to take responsibility for all aspects of their research and be able to explain their research, which is something that AI can't do. So we need to teach researchers that they still must have there still must be agency and oversight over everything they do when they're using AI tools, and they need to take responsibility. Some of the key recommendations from the EU guidelines that are important for universities for governance is to consider promoting, guiding, and supporting this responsible use of Gen AI in research, to monitor also its development and the use of Gen AI systems within their organizations. And that will also be an important obligation under the EU AI Act. Um, and to reference or integrate these guidelines at the EU level into guidelines that we already have within our universities on good research practices. So we need to look at incorporating these as well. Some of the aspects I was trying to kind of map out what needs to be considered in terms of governance. From a research integrity perspective, three areas here are really important, and that's training and supports, the actual governance in terms of the policies, and then the ethics committee as well. So in terms of training and supports, I think we need urgent integrity and literacy training for staff and students and researchers. And what we also need is to, through other supports, for example, events like community of practice, start to try and create a more open and transparent culture within universities around how people are using AI. So I think there is still a bit of a social taboo around admitting that you use AI for your work. I don't know if it's the same there, but I feel that still that it's kind of almost that something that is a secret still, how you're using it in your work, whether it's for creating lectures or for researchers in terms of, or for PhD students, how they're using it for example, conducting literature reviews. That we need an open culture around this, because we're not going to identify the ethical issues unless we're actually talking about how we're using it. And at the same time, we need to update our current policies around research integrity to include the AI guidelines at the EU level. We also need AI strategy, which is something we're working on within our university, and setting up a working group to develop that AI strategy that covers all aspects of teaching, the student experience, and research. And of course, it's essential that we collaborate at the national level or EU level with other universities, so that we're not repeating the same things and dealing with this issue alone, but drawing from each other's experiences and pooling resources. Um, Another aspect to consider, and that's essential, of course, it just doesn't come under my area as an integrity officer, but it's to reconsider assessment, of course, and maybe reconsider approaches to how we assess PhD students and their research, to encourage so that they're not resorting to using maybe AI for plagiarism, or that we are identifying how they're using it during the PhD cycle and not at the very end. And also to consider the role of the ethics committee as well in this, and how they could be monitoring as well AI use within research projects, and ensuring that there's some sort of assessment there when projects are seeking ethical approval. But in terms of the sequence of all these different aspects that need to be considered in governance, that's something I'm unclear of and interested to talk about as well today, is should the policies and guidelines come first? But at the same time, this is changing at such a fast pace, it's hard to keep up. And we need policies that are probably agile and that can change. But we urgently need training. So I'm not sure what the sequence of events here should be. But a key point I wanted to make today is the point of moving away from policing and detecting plagiarism to kind of just looking at how we can support lecturers and researchers to be using it responsibly in their day-to-day work. And focusing on the ways that we use these tools. So for example, understanding the difference between how we use it for text transformation compared to text generation, focusing on the different tasks it can be used for and the level of risk associated with different type of research tasks. And also understanding confidentiality and privacy, and teaching people about privacy settings and being aware of the terms and conditions of the tools they're using, and taking more care and time to pick out the tools that they use and the ones that are more trustworthy for research, and potentially also guiding them on which tools are more suitable for research. There may be no perfect AI tool that's 100% reliable, but there are probably some tools that are more suitable than others for research. And here are some examples. So yes, a lack of knowledge of these ethical issues will be a cause of research misconduct, and particularly new areas of misconduct that go beyond simply just plagiarism, if we don't tackle this issue as soon as possible. In terms of best practice, a colleague of mine who's kind of an expert within our university on this topic, Hazel Farrell, she recommended looking to the Australian higher education system, that they have developed an AI strategy there. And within this, you'll find a lot of best practice among universities in Australia on this. So that's interesting to look at. And yeah, I would like to have a discussion with you today. I mentioned some questions for discussing in terms of like what should be the kind of the sequence of measures that we take in terms of governance, how should we approach it? But yeah, what strategies can universities adopt to make sure we move from this kind of focus on detecting and policing of AI use to instead fostering an environment that promotes ethical and responsible AI use? And also what kinds of training, supports and assessments are needed to support the ethical use of AI in research? And of course, if there's any other questions from you, I'm happy to try my best to answer them today. But I think some of you here are probably know a lot more about this topic than me. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Kim. Okay,
I'll stop sharing.
Stop recording it.